just kind of wanted to let you know how the evening is planned right now. So we're going to have 3 talks from researchers from the Albers Foundation that will give us a kind of historical and contemporary view. And then we're going to move into presentations by MIT researchers. So happy to kick it off with Amy here, who's going to introduce herself and get us going. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. So first of all, thank you to Chloe and to Zach Lieberman for inviting us, to MIT and Media Lab for hosting us, and for many of you for coming to the workshops this afternoon. So it was a really fun experience. So I'll dive right in. I'm going to talk about The Anonymous Designer as Radical, a reading of Anni Albers. And my name is Hayden Porter. I'm at the Albers Foundation as assistant curator. So Anni Albers tested the limits of vision on the loom and on the page. She was a practitioner who took knowledge from her hands and a writer who challenged the intellectual boundaries of art, education, and the human condition. So words and material really formed and informed each other in Albers' work. She was a major voice for textiles in mid-20th century America, publishing more than 15 articles and periodicals for design, education, craft, and art. In 1959, she published her first book on designing, which was a compilation of these writings. In 1965, she published her treatise on weaving. So I'm going to focus on her writing and her design philosophy, which really grew from her early days at the Bauhaus. So a little background, this is Anni Albers. She was born Annelies Fleischmann in 1899, so right at the turn of the century in Berlin, Germany. Her grandfather was Leopold Ullstein, who had founded the major publishing company of Ullstein Verlag. So by the time Anni Albers entered the Bauhaus in 1922, Ullstein Verlag was the biggest publisher in Europe of weekly newspapers, like this is the Berlin Illustrated newspaper. It was the first mass-market German magazine. Very quick off the mark to use photography and new offset technologies. It was also, importantly, very inexpensive. So its circulation was 1.8 million by the end of the 1920s. So I just picked a couple of covers. The one on the left is actually a picture of the German president and his defense minister and a man with a trident in the Baltic Sea. So you can see that they understood how to put a story together. And on the right is Albert Einstein, and this is the cover basically the month that Anni Albers started at the Bauhaus. So Ullstein Verlag also published Die Dame, which was the major trendsetting women's magazine at the time. So these are a few covers from the spring of 1922, again, when Anni started the Bauhaus. So I just wanted to show these to give you a sense of the print material and the print culture that was passing through like literally everybody's hands when Anni entered the Bauhaus in the early 20s. So you can think of language in this printed form, it's very much a material. And I think because Anni Albers has this particularly strong personal connection, because of Ullstein Verlag, I think she really understood the power of words in printed media, so it's sort of a framework for this. So at the Bauhaus, Anni completed her preliminary coursework, was accepted to weaving workshop. By 1924, she created numerous samples, materials, and 2 large-scale wall hangings. The one on the left is very symmetrical. This is her first weaving, and the one on the right is presumably her second. And you can see they're very different, symmetrical, very asymmetrical. Just one note, it's kind of interesting, these were made on the same warp, most likely. So you have the same underlying structure to very different effect. So there wasn't a lot of formal instruction at this time in the weaving workshop. So there's a lot of experimenting, playing with materials, this idea of really starting with zero. And like, I think the struggle with the material is also really important, that you learn it by, fighting it and then learning to embrace it. So back to print media. Walter Gropius, founder of the Bauhaus, also understood the sort of importance of gaining favor in the press for your cause. So he really tried to place the Bauhaus in printed media. So Young Mention, Young People, was a very early success. They were able to have an entire issue devoted to the Bauhaus. So this is in November of 1924. The magazine was one of the most cosmopolitan youth magazines of the 20s and one of the most important in Germany at the time. So the younger members were responsible, of the Bauhaus were responsible for the issue. Josef Albers, was the editor, and Josh Schmidt, who was the typographer, did the design. I just wanted to show this was kind of interesting. So this was the Bauhaus design, and then Young Mention was like, whoa, that's a little too radical, so we also need to do a second cover where it's, you can see there's a little bit more traditional framing device here. So there are a sort of glossy section of photographs, which are separate from the printed text, which I think is interesting, which are on newsprint here. So within the section about our work, the workshops were given space to sort of talk about what they were up to, what they were interested in. And Anni Albers, Annelies Fleischmann's first essay is published in this section here. So it's Bauhaus Weiberei or Bauhaus Weaving. So I pulled a few quotes so you get a sense of the article and a sense of what she's thinking about in the weaving workshop. Weaving is an ancient craft. Its mechanization didn't change it substantially. It just alienated weavers from their material. Nowadays, the weaver is just loosely connected with the loom. The power loom runs by itself. Today, the work has to be experimental. Too much of the sense for the material has been lost over the years. We have to train this sense afresh. So about the same time, a couple of months later, in January 1925, the Bauhaus publishes a supplement in a women's magazine, Neue Frauenkleidung und Frauenkultur, which is New Women's Clothing and Women's Culture. I like the subtitle, Magazine for Personal Artistic Clothing, Physical Culture, and Arts and Crafts. Not as trendy as Die Dame, which you might be able to tell just by the cover. Smaller circulation, a little more conservative, but a very strong voice for the changing role of women after World War I. I just picked a few spreads so you get a sense of this as well. Wonderful athletic ski fashions that probably weighed about 500 pounds, but I think they're really lovely. There's an article, Neue Wohnkultur, which is like the new living culture, sort of within the home, interior design, decor, how you would set up your home. And then the one on the right here is Das Bauhaus in Weimar, which is a very long article in support of the Bauhaus. So you get a sense of like what's being discussed in this issue of the women's magazine. Just on a side note, because I find the print culture very interesting, none of these images really have anything to do with the text that they're directly on. So it's like this idea of like the relationship between text and image had not quite yet been settled, which I find really fascinating. So after this editorial content and a lot of advertising, we come to the Bauhaus supplement, and Annelies Fleischmann writes Wohnökonomie, which is a completely made-up word. So she's kind of playing off the Wohnkultur that we saw earlier in the magazine, but she makes this up for this article. So it can be translated as home economics, which is referencing sort of more scientific focus of American home economics, which had been translated in popular sort of discussion in the Germanys in the 1920s. But it's a little bit different from that. It's more like living economy, like how you might arrange your life and the objects in your life in a more meaningful way. So in this article, Anni mainly considers the design of the home and how it needs to be updated. So 4 hours more liberty through domestic arrangements implies substantial improvement in the actual way of living. So you're not messing with your stuff or cleaning it all the time. You have more time to do something interesting. Today, the woman is the victim of the wrong form of housing. It's obvious that a complete reshaping is called for. The comparison shows the way, which I love this. Our clothing meets the requirements that traffic engineering, hygiene, and economy impose. You cannot ride a train in a hoop skirt. So things change, the home should also change. The simple, functional, hygienic, therefore convenient form is necessary today. So just to pause for a second, these two kind of design tenets from these 2 articles, first, that design problems should be solved in the hands, in the material, and 2, that design should be made to make life more efficient and thereby give you the potential to have life more meaningful. These 2 ideas really carry with her throughout her entire life, like in her writings and in the work that she does in textiles and weaving. These ideas grow in her writings after she moves to the United States, bolstered by her experience, and I think about some underlying philosophy of the beautiful and what it means to lead a meaningful life. Let's see. In May 1925, Annelies Fleischmann marries Josef Albers. She changes her name to Anni Albers. They're at the Bauhaus until 1933 when it's shut down by the Nazi Party. by stroke of good luck and good fortune, they're invited to teach at Black Mountain College in North Carolina. They arrived in the US in November of 1933. So the trustees of Black Mountain who helped to bring them to the US were very well connected, gave them an introduction in the American press. And here's a kind of incredible array of press on the Albers' arrival in the US. And this is picked up by the Associated Press. They take a photograph and it's syndicated like literally across the country. These are papers from Asheville, Dallas, Spartanburg, Aurora, Milton, Atlantic City, St. Paul. New York Sun is the one that gives her a beauty mark, which I think is also really interesting. But you can see that Annie gets a lot of attention herself for her textiles and for her work. Just one more photo. This is also just because I find it really interesting. A few months later, in January of 1934, another photograph for the local paper in Charlotte. They styled themselves very, very similar to the photo that had been taken in 1933. And this style is very similar to the fashion that was in Neue Frauenkleidung from 1924. So it was just a fun side. So 5 years in the United States, 1938. There's an exhibition called Bauhaus that's presented in the Museum of Modern Art. It's organized by Herbert Bayer, along with Walter Gropius and Isa Gropius, who are the editors for the catalog, and they invite Anni Albers to write an article called The Weaving Workshop. So this is one of her first articles in English. She's very excited about it, and she writes about it to her friends. And it's a reflection similar to Bauhaus Fiber, sort of centralizing the importance of materials. What I find very interesting is that she includes it in her first book on designing, but she revises the text. So there's been 20 years between 1938 and 1959, and she's been thinking about these things, and so she changes the text, and I'm just going to read some of the additions that she makes to it. So in a world as chaotic as the European world after World War I, any exploratory artistic work had to be experimental in a very comprehensive sense. What had existed had proved to be wrong. Everything leading up to it seemed to be wrong too. They, the weavers, believed that only working directly with the material could help them get back to a sound basis and related them with the problems of their own time. Another article that's included in the On Designing book, this is the one that she leads the whole book off with, Design, Anonymous, and Timeless. So this original text is from 1947, but for the book in 1959, she adds a brand new first sentence, which I think is very interesting here. Though only the few penetrate the screen, that habits of thought and conduct form in their time, it is good for all of us to pause sometimes, to think, wonder, maybe worry, to ask, where are we now? It is better that the material speaks than that we speak ourselves. And good designer is the anonymous designer, so I believe the one who does not stand in the way of the material, who sends his products on their way to a useful life without an ambitious appearance. And then one last article, and this one is my favorite. I like the relationship between text and image in this one. The photographs are actually by Josef Albers. So this is one of their few collaborations, sort of public collaborations. This one was written in 1943 originally, so the middle of World War II. It was not included in the first edition of On Designing, but it was included in the second edition in 1961. Sort of a very strongly worded version of what she had hinted at in Bonne Economie. Very few of us can own things without being corrupted by them. Our households are overburdened with objects of only occasional usefulness, but they cling to us as we cling to them, and thus they hamper our freedom. Possessing can degrade us. Our urge for possessing is constantly nourished again and again throughout history and has been an underlying cause for war. We shall have to choose between those bringing distraction or those leading to contemplation, between those accentuating anonymous service or self-centered individualism, between the emphasis on being or on having. It's a really important sentence. And then one little postscript. In 1942, she delivers a radio address for WWNC Asheville, which is wonderful Western North Carolina, just the call sign. We are responsible as designers for the things to be made and for the common attitude towards the existing things. Through our works, we affect in a very real way this world we live in, and thus too the way that we live in it.
Hi. I'm Caris Molina. I'm the Associate Curator at the Albers Foundation. And like all of my Albers Foundation colleagues here, I'm also an artist. I like to get my hands in the threads, and that's where we're going to go just for a brief dip into some weavings. So thanks to Chloe and to Zach and everybody who's a part of Future Sketches, who are looking forward to hearing more. And thank you, Amy, for setting up Anni's writings and her ideas so eloquently. So we'll now try to get a dip into the stuff of the world, as Anni sometimes said. So also, this is very active, ongoing research, so please bear with me, and I hope that folks might want to chat later about some of this. So Anni Albers wrote often, and she wrote eloquently. She wrote about the ideological sense of the Bauhaus and the problems of modern industrial production. She wrote about the history and genesis of weaving throughout the ancient world, the evolution of the loom, weaving's relationship to architecture, and even about jewelry. She wrote so much about so many different things, but the fact remains that she wrote very little about her actual weavings. She wrote even less about the process of making them, but she did talk about materials. In this collection of essays on designing that was first published in 1959, she includes the word materials almost 200 times. It's about 15 essays, and she averages 15 times per essay talking about materials. This is really her love, her focus, is this stuff. So into the materials, she didn't tell us all that much about her process to get there, but she did sometimes tell us stories. And so, since we know so little, we'll take a little imagination today. Start with this story about a hat. Could Anni Albers' weavings and engineering have come from a hat? Could they have been drawn like a magician pulls a rabbit from a top hat? Could they have been drawn from a simple crocheted cap? So the story goes a little bit like this. Anni Albers, Anneliese Fleischmann marries Josef Albers, and at some point the two take a trip to Florence, where Anni Albers buys a crocheted cap. Sorry. My apologies. So Albers tells a story about this crochet cap in 1934 and also later into the 1960s, that she takes the cap to her studio and is investigating this cap that's made of cellophane that she's bought in Florence, and she's drawn to the material, to the intrinsic possibility of what this material might be. So in 1934, in the magazine Arts and Decoration, this is where the first time this story is published. She talks about this, this unraveling of the cap, of the cellophane cap, to create a new material to use as a weaving tool. And regardless of the details of the story, whether it's true or not, she uses this, and it tells us something about her. It tells us that Anni Albers is an artist and designer who sees the material world around her. She sees the potential and how something might be transformed, how something might become something more than itself. So whether or not Anni Albers actually uses an unraveled cap to make a textile later on, we don't really know. But it's a vehicle to tell us a story of invention, creativity, and engineering. So when Anni Albers is first at the Bauhaus, she is making weavings woven of wool and silk and cotton. From there, her vocabulary of materials grows to include viscose, rayon, artificial silk, and eventually cellophane. This new synthetic material that was newish was invented in about 1908, and she began to use it in the 1920s. But in Germany, it was extremely economical to use some of these new materials. They were being produced nearby, and they were actually even cheaper than cotton and silk in some circumstances. So, back to our cellophane cap. Albers is faced in 1929 with a design challenge by Bauhaus director Hannes Meyer, who's an architect. And he's looking for a modern solution to an age-old problem of sound dampening for an auditorium in concert hall at the 80GB Trade Union School in Bernau, which is just a bit outside of Berlin. But in 1929, Anni Albers is not considering red velvet. She is a modern woman, and the Bauhaus is a modern school, and they need a new way. So she returns to this cellophane from the cap. As Amy discussed before, Anni is very aware of the world that she's living in. Albers is deeply a woman of her time, emerging from the 19th century into a new world of new materials. And cellophane was a champion of this time. It was not only a packaging material for goods and foods, but it was also something that eventually became extremely popular in dress. Both of these are outfits made by Elsa Schiaparelli, and on the right we have Peggy Guggenheim in a fully cellophane dress. The left, I love this. Cellophane shines in a brave new world. So these are new materials for a new modern age. So Albers designs the cellophane fabric. It becomes known as her silver stuff. It's a wall-covering material that is used to line the auditorium. It is a two-sided fabric, not quite a double weave, with a fine black cotton warp. The textile is packed with shots of cellophane fiber on one side and a fluffy cotton chenille on the other. So the thickness and the density of the weave makes this transparent cellulose fiber reflect as if it was purely silver, with the way that it interacts as well with the black warp. It appears silver, but if you were actually to take one of these cellophane fibers away, it's fully transparent. It's engineered in this way so that it is sound absorbing through the chenille side and light reflecting. So it's doing double service for this space. You get in a little closer. I don't know how clear that is, but so we have this fluffy cellophane or chenille that's absorbing the sound. And then the panels were installed in the space here. They were all individually mounted. About 300 meters of the material was used, was produced, and it was, in the end, all had to be woven likely by hand, by a whole crew of weavers, Bauhaus and otherwise. In this interview that Albers did in the early 1960s, she also, in talking about this textile, she was really fixated on this this scientific study that was done on the material, which was done by Zeiss Icon, the optics and lens manufacturer in Germany. That they did the study to see how much reflectivity the textile actually had. And this aspect of this sort of scientific engineering of the material was something that really was enticing to her. Even in 1963, she was excited about the fact that her stuff was being looked at in this way, and it could be this useful and surprising. So from there, she continued in cellophane. She eventually, both in her independent freelance design studio in Germany and at Black Mountain College after 1933, she continued making experiments in cellophane. This is one that I really love. It's with a fine cotton warp, and I have some close-ups in a minute. But cellophane, so this is, she experimented with it with transparent cellophane, with colored cellophanes, with cellophane in the warp and in the weft, which is quite incredible. So basically making a fully transparent material. The hygienic and kind of the technical aspects of this material was something that was really enticing to her, again, sort of basing on how she's thinking of the economy. It's dust repellent and washable, which is hard to imagine. But she's drawn to these endless possibilities of this sort of strange new fiber and how it might transform our lives. And there's something about these materials that are really enticing as well, because of the way that the cellophane functions as the reflective properties of it, as she obviously knew very well how to engineer it before. Not too long later, in 1939, she continues with cellophane and plastics and develops some wall covering materials, originally with also cellophane, but also copper thread and chenille again. And this is an example that eventually is used as a drapery material in Philip Johnson's Rockefeller Guest House in Manhattan, that was used as an interior drapery for a space that was hosted a lot of cocktail parties for patrons of the Museum of Modern Art. And here we have a little close-up of it. So this one, there are versions of it where the cellophane is actually white plastic, but this one is fully cellophane. Copper is another new material that she's using. Obviously, metallic threads have existed for a long time, but this was a non-tarnishing, flexible copper. So she continues experimenting in new materials. So in 1949, MoMA hosted an exhibition of her textiles in which this textile makes a very star appearance. She provided a sample, and Philip Johnson suggested that the museum actually produce length of the fabric to kind of cover one of the walls of the galleries in this textile. And some of the print material from that exhibition are really some incredible statements. And in one that accompanied some of the material said, "The artist Anni Albers is also a fabric engineer. To engineer fabric means first to analyze its purpose, whether it is to be soft drapery or dress material, a rugged upholstery fabric, or stiff translucent screen, used as Albers has used it, as an architectural element in a modern room. Once the purpose is clear, the fabric engineer must choose the materials best suited for that purpose. The work of Anni Albers is distinguished by the extraordinary imagination with which she selects new and experimental materials. Any material is good enough for art," she says. "It is just as possible to find her using wooden dowels, cotton, chenille, or copper threads." Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happening here.
Just thanks.
So after moving to Connecticut in 1950, Albers was no longer teaching. They've left Black Mountain College. And she's now establishing her own studio again. And this is the first time that she's doing this really since the Bauhaus. And around this time she starts making pictorial weavings. This is a term that she coined for the works that she was making specifically in the direction of art. So these are not, as the other materials, serving materials, not drapes, not upholstery, etc. And one of the first of those is Black, White, Gold, which is a weaving that is small in scale, it is framed, and it's really to be viewed as a painting. And in this weaving, we have lurex, which is another sort of new material that's paired with jute and cotton and again some fluffy chenille. And this weaving kind of really ushers in a whole new world for Anni. She starts to make these pictorial weavings, going not necessarily away from serving materials, but really to focus on letting threads be themselves, letting threads create the structure and the composition of an artwork. And actually, the first time she really exhibited a whole host of these textiles was at MIT in 1959. And in the catalog for that exhibition, she wrote a sort of treatise on the pictorial weavings. And so she says, though some of the earliest weavings unearthed after thousands of years have the magic of things not yet found useful, and later periods have shown us weaving as art, thousands of years of establishing and expanding the usefulness of woven materials have made us see in them first something to be worn, walked on, sat on, to be cut up, even sewn together again. In short, something largely something no longer itself fulfilled. And she continues there, which we'll do later. But I just wanted to show a couple of these pictorial weavings. So again, what she's really looking for with these is to let the material itself become the sort of expressive element of the artwork. She's learned of how to use her material in so many different ways. She knows how to be efficient. Both of these weavings are on the same warp. They're doing two totally different things. She's learned how to experiment with new materials, and she has continued to find ways to let her threads speak. And just quickly here, this is her last weaving from 1968. After this point, she then moves into making prints. And this is a weaving that I think about as a weaving about material, because it's so much the surface of the lurex. It's also sort of an ode to, it's an epitaph, right? So it's a fitting title. The metallic lurex fibers gleam. This golden tape creates this smooth and shiny surface. And the black and white warps occasionally are shifting in their orientation, never obscuring the gold, but occasionally creating shifts in texture. And again, we have a very similar pairing to this auditorium material. We have a very fine warp. We have this sort of reflecting new material, and we have cellophane, or chenille. But the chenille this time is no longer serving. It's now been freed. It's kind of finding its own path, kind of challenging the logic of the grid. And it's monumental, it's intimate, it's personal, it's universal. Perhaps it's a monument to weaving or to the materials themselves. The yarns that have previously, for 4 decades, been listening with her and that she's been becoming fluent with, have now kind of have their own voice a little bit freer. So I just wanted to finish with this one little quote. In a correspondence with curator Mildred Constantine from the Museum of Modern Art, Albers wrote that she thinks of her wall hangings as an attempt to arrive at art, that is, giving the material used for their realization a sense beyond themselves. Materials give form to an idea. I'm looking for permanence, both in material and in the form given to it. Thank you.
I'm Kyle Goldbach. I'm going to talk about Josef Albers' work in printmaking, which is something he did for 60 years. surprising amount of time, and his life changed as his work changed, and vice versa. And hopefully, through looking at his prints, we can get a glimpse into how the circumstances changed, how his prints changed with evolving technology, and who he got to help him along the way. So this is him. Josef Albers, as a printmaker, was omnivorous, inventive, and opportunistic. Over the course of his life, he made work in applied arts workshops, commercial printing facilities, metal and sign fabrication shops, and with students and master printers in renowned institutions. His output was as prolific as it was varied, offering a unique glimpse into the development of his thought alongside technical advancements of the time. His first prints were in relief, the oldest and most rudimentary form of printmaking, where a single block of material or matrix is carved with gouges, inked, and pressed into a substrate. This technique's remained largely unchanged for hundreds of years. Some people sort of did it earlier with the stamping. A technique, in this process, the image is constructed through excavation and removal. His first series of linoleum cuts depict the deeply carved trenches of sand mines in his hometown Bachau, which was a major source of raw material during German industrialization. The ruminations on place reified through the act of carving and belong to a romantic tradition of the sublime. They figure a 28-year-old Albers at the crux of 19th and 20th century, forming a graphic language tethered to the long history of painting and representation. All of this would change when he joined the Bauhaus as a student in 1920, leaving printmaking behind for over a decade and a half. When the Bauhaus finally shuttered and the Alberses escaped to America to teach at Black Mountain College, he returned to printmaking, perhaps out of convenience or desperation. The tools remained the same, but everything else had changed. Here are just a few examples of what he was up to at Black Mountain. Kind of funky. In his time at Black Mountain, it was initially marked by this flurry of abstract relief prints varying from organic looping forms to hard-edged geometric figures, all of which, through linear construction, demonstrate a dynamic perception of space and plastic movement. Out of necessity, Albers got back to basics in the hills of North Carolina. The relief print titled High Up, this one pictured here, was made using simple carving tools and a hand press. Paper stencils were used to mask out white voids in the composition, and the darkest areas were made by treating the porousness of the wood in ways to absorb less ink, achieving a richer black when printed with equal pressure. These prints are an experiment in how to get more with less in a single inking. Particular attention was paid to the patterns and quality inherent in the wood, drawing our attention to those surfaces while skewing our perception through the spatial effect and likeness to rippling water. Here you see Albers' carving tools at the bottom right, which include Japanese gouges, X-Acto knives, files, and toothpicks. At bottom left is a partially carved block that's uninked, which is maybe used for registration or discarded in the process of printmaking. Through his trial proofs, we can see the development of the new drawing vocabulary and the serial exploration of a single composition. In printmaking, the immediacy of the event of creation is always tempered, allowing for making to unfold as a series of questions, comparisons, and technical decisions. Those qualities inherent to printmaking are a foundational element of Albers' thought and inform his painting practice. In 1949, Albers resigned from Black Mountain College and took up a new position at Yale University. The prints he made while teaching there show Albers attempting to refine his ideas by employing help wherever he could find it. Here's an example of an engraved brass plate titled Intaglio Duo K. To carve the lines, Albers contracted a local sign shop that was more accustomed to printing or producing institutional signage than art. Instead of inking the plate, Albers had student printers at Yale working through the press with slightly damp paper laid over top, creating an embossed image. In this way, the properties inherent to the process, pressure, paper, and the matrix, are held in an invisible relationship. The resulting embossings are nearly impossible to see, especially on this screen. They only become apparent through close observation or directional light. The reluctance to immediately reveal puts the responsibility on the viewer to look closely or walk away. This technical leap from handmaking to machine tooling is an ideological move for Albers. He writes about these drawings and their unique use of mechanical assistance as establishing, quote, unmodulated line as a legitimate artistic means, in this way opposing a belief that the handmade is better than the machine-made, or that mechanical construction is anti-graphic or unable to arouse emotion. He states, in this age of industrial evolution, both methods have their merits. In Albers' work, there is always a balance of both. In his notebook shown here, you see the development of the taxonomy of forms, if you can see that. Can you see that?
Yes.
You can see that. Oh, good. They're nice, right? All right. First by freehand, then as schematics to be read by technicians with pantographs and industrial routers. You can see a constellation of points highlighted and numbered as a sequence of cuts, starting at the top left with 1 and moving around the form. These points and paths mark the translation from Albers' hand to the router's cut. Albers described those points as the soul and spine of the line. All right, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. This is 1958, and Albers retired from Yale and he began his most productive period of his life at the age of 70. His greatest printing collaboration began when he met a young printer named Kenneth Tyler, and Tyler would go on to become a master printer and revolutionary of the medium. He brought about a renaissance in printmaking of the 20th century by embracing new technologies and expanding the scale and ambition of modern print. This all began with his collaborations with Albers, who Tyler claims was the catalyst of his career. The two would eventually realize Albers' work in its most precise and technologically advanced form in a portfolio of line-cut embossings titled WEG, or White Embossings on Gray. Here's an example. For WEG, Tyler developed a method of simultaneously printing and embossing Albers' images with extreme accuracy using an industrial hydraulic press. Now the pressure and the depth of the relief could be precisely controlled, making the process more reliable and less taxing on the printers. With greater pressure from the press came the need for more precise and stable engravings. To achieve this, a programmer reduced the drawings to a digital tape, which electronically activated an automatic engraving mill to incise the mirror image onto an aluminum plate. Tyler and the programmer drafted contours for the milling head of the engraver, and Albers approved the resulting lines he preferred. Here's the printers demonstrating different examples of line quality in this proof, and Albers circled his approval in the center. Tyler even researched and developed his own type of experimental paper in collaboration with a local paper mill that solved the problem of paper stretching and ink absorbency. He called it row leaf after his collaborator's Rochester paper mill. At this point, Albers was traveling less, so most of their collaboration happened through studio visits, letters, and phone calls. The drawings they sent back and forth are an amazing resource in retracing the steps of their process. They show Albers speaking to the printers, drawing their attention to the most minute details of the composition, where lines touch, emphasizing how thick and thin lines should join and overlap and where they should be disconnected. In Albers' mind, all of this effort was to exaggerate their construction, drawing our attention further into analyzing how they came to be. This emphasis on how, not the what of art, is a hallmark of his thought. All right, one last example of Tyler and Albers' collaboration with each other that emphasize this idea a bit further are these 8 lithographs titled Midnight and Noon. This is going to be really difficult to see, so what color is that? Green? Yellow. Through these prints, Albers and Tyler play an almost empirical game of how to get more with less within the given medium. Using the inherently thin and transparent qualities of lithographic ink along with experimental substrates made of zinc and aluminum, the two set to work. Here's the premise. Each print uses only one ink in 2 different densities on 2 separate plates, one zinc labeled A at the top and one aluminum labeled C, which you can see in that drawing. The results of the overlapping plates produce 3 distinct variations, so distinct that it seems impossible to do with a single color. At right, you can see the printer's color testing showing how much variation can occur with transparency alone. This photo shows Tyler mixing color for proofing, and at the right you see all the colors he listed and how much transparent ink was added to those colors by volume. And you can see the corresponding illustrations of plates there as well. Through subtle material shifts, Albers shows the relativity of a single color in relation to itself, a magic trick of sorts that's the result of a lifetime of looking, questioning, and making. By registering these subtle material changes, we're drawn closer to understanding the changing nature of our own perception. In Albers' first essay, written in English, titled Art as Experience, published 30 years before these prints, he wrote, "Life is change, day and night, cold and warmth, sun and rain. It is more between the facts than the facts themselves." That's all I got.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucy and I'm a master's student here, and I'm showing you my final class project for Recreating the Past, where I took a look at Enid Marx. So this is Enid. She was born in 1902 and lived till 1998. She grew up in London and was known familiarly throughout her life as Marco. She was also a distant cousin of Karl Marx, the German philosopher. And her work mainly focused on textile, printmaking, and prints in general. So here are some examples of her work. This is her textile pattern. She likes to use a lot of triangles and repeating patterns. These are some examples of her prints and illustrations. And you can see here the repetition is something that is found throughout her work. Another one from her time during the RCA. And Enid later became involved in the British modernism and utility movement, which is a style designed to cope with the raw material shortage and rationing after the First World War. So it's very utility driven. On the right side, you can see you're trying to use as little material as possible to get what you want and to maximize the effect. And that was what she was interested in as well. So here is a clip of a researcher talking about it. Is there sound?
Set your sound output to the Crestron. Choose Crestron. Yeah, that should work.
Okay, thank you.
Enid Marx's work really reflects the conditions of utility, which were to use materials highly effectively with very small repeats so that materials couldn't be wasted. There's a familiar kind of zigzag pattern, which you could argue comes from a kind of African stylization of patterning, and also a synthesis of kind of dots and linear motifs that you can see reflected in her earlier work. So in the interwar period, Enid Marx really gained a kind of following and a kind of dynamic. She was working very effectively as an independent designer and kind of in a group of other women designers. It was a period where the war had led to kind of a tragic loss of life of men, but that kind of enabled women to kind of develop their own skills. They were also, Enid Marx is one of the first generation of women to be able to be arts educated and to sell her work commercially.
So, as you've heard, she was quite successful with her work, and so successful that Enid was commissioned by the London Transport Board to design the textile for the subway seats. So this is her most famous work, and you can see here a little bit about subway seats. They're made out of a textile called moquette, and is a type of woven pile fabric with a distinct velvet-like feel, and is typically made out of 80% nylon and 20% wool or cotton, and it is known for its durability, which again reflects in her utility movement style, that they're very durable. So some places where we know moquette is like in public transport. She has also a link to an Instagram page called I Don't Give a Seat, and they show a collection of very interesting seat patterns in public transits, and in cinemas and in airports. So public places where we see a lot of textile, they're usually made out of moquette, which I think is interesting to think about textile as materials of public space as well, and how they look like. So these were her initial designs, and you can already see the colors are very muted, and here's a quote from Enid. "We all thought at first that the best way of disguising dirt was to use colors which would more or less tone in with the dirt." So that was like it was very, very utility driven. And the whole, and I think it's still very interesting to look at like the designs that then she ended up with, considering all like the situation of where this textile was used. This is the final sketch for her design, and this is how it looked like, and this is the pattern that was then implemented. The colors are very muted, as you can see, but they're also, it helps, it distracts people less. This is also a reason why the colors are muted, and also the pattern helps to cover up the dirt, but also to prevent people from graffitiing on it, or like to leave litter, or like make more dirt on the seats. And then in the class, the task is to kind of recreate these patterns through a computational tool, and this is my work. I was using Drawbot, which is a Python-based graphic or computational tool. First, I started with like making the lines. On the left, you can see the reference, using sine waves to create the lines, and then I looked at the triangles and used Bezier curves to make those shapes, and then compose them using a Boolean operation. And the most interesting thing is that the original textile, because the tile is textile, it has like those edges and this texture, which was more difficult to do in computationally. You could like draw in all the lines, but then I talked to Zach, and I think one interesting way was to use compression. So when you export an image, you can use the fact that they're pixels to kind of create the fact that textiles are also little grids, and played around with different percentages of compression to get them. 40% seemed like the most closest to the original tile. Here you can see the original, the recreation, and then the recreation in pattern. Yeah, these were the steps: the sine wave, the Bezier curves, the Boolean operations, and then the compression, and how they look side by side. Yeah, and here's a QR code to a podcast about public transport seat pattern designs, if people are interested. Yeah, that's it.
Excellent, great. So this is a very nice follow-up to the previous talk, but out in the world, lots of patterns. And I create like generative art and like computer art, make images with computers. And I've been wanting to try to like recreate these patterns. So to start with, I wanted to know if like someone else had already kind of thought about these, and a lot of different like fields and stuff have thought about it, but the one that I stumbled upon is this book, Introduction to Crystallography, which is dealing with patterns in 3 dimensions. And it has this great image in there of like weird like hands being rotated around to kind of describe like ways of making patterns like mathematically. So let's use hands. Hands are great. What's cool about hands is that they have like 2 different, you can tell when they're reflected or not. So the way that the mathematicians kind of talk about this is that there's like various combinations of scaling and reflection and translation in different ways. And it's cool because like you can make these like really tiny, just switch between these different patterns, and you get like really dramatically different results. So I wanted to kind of keep on taking this further and further. And so one route is, instead of going over space, is that you can kind of go over time. So I have different frames of a hand, and you can pattern that across the screen and start to fill things up. The other thing is I do live coding, and in live coding, you're actually having to type in code to change your computer graphics like live in front of people, and you kind of want to maximize the wow factor, like how amazing things are, while like changing the smallest amount of code, because you're going to make mistakes. And so if you change the code a tiny bit and it looks amazing, that's sweet. And patterns have a lot of sources for this. So like you can set up something like that, and then like with like just changing that same pattern thing we were talking about before, it'll just like completely change how things look. There's other things you can start to do, so like repeating a bunch of lines across the screen, and then sensing or like using their position to kind of change their configuration, you can make pretty dramatically different looking things. Why not go beyond lines and to like actually make shapes? So these are like shapes that kind of like increase the number of concentric circles or how wiggly they are, and then we can like apply both of those changes over a grid. This is kind of a similar situation where we got some spirals, and how many spirals they are kind of changes across the screen. And we're also drawing on that mathematics from before about like, this one's like, I think it's like 6 different rotations and then translating it across the screen. More spirals, same system, but doing some different things. We can bring it back into the real world. We can, this was like a pattern that then like cut out, and then you can kind of, it's transparent and stuff. The next thing that I kind of did, like, as I was like collecting these patterns out in the world, was kind of saying like you would have a repeating pattern, but the way that it reflected light, or like this is like a bunch of mirrors, and the mirrors are all pointing slightly different directions. This is like the elevator of the place I was living in, and like the light hits it differently at different places. So this is just kind of like starting to apply different, just like taking that idea of being like, oh, you have like symmetry, but then you also have weird things happening with colors. Just doing more colors, and yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about. Thank you.
So I'm Eric Demain. I'm a professor in computer science over in CSAIL building, and I work a lot with my father, Martin Demain, who's also an artist in residence in computer science, and he couldn't be here today. Unfortunately, he's out of town, but wanted to be. And we work in a field called computational origami, which combines mathematics, computer science, and sculpture, art making. And I wanted to show you some of the things we do, especially these 2 pieces, which are directly inspired by the Alberses. So an example of a mathematical computational result is Origamizer. This is an algorithm. You give it an arbitrary 3D surface, like a bunny, and it gives you a crease pattern. You fold the blue lines one way, the red lines the other way, and you get the surface you wanted. It only takes about 10 hours. Easy. But very general computational origami design. It's cool. But it's also a little too easy. So the sculpture we make is different. We are inspired by this work by students of Josef Albers in 1927, 1928. They did some of the very early geometric origami, geometric paper folding. This is a class about exploring form and what you can make, and paper is a nice cheap material to just play around with. I think that's the inspiration. And you see, for example, this mirror-ori pattern, which is named after someone who discovered it much later in Japan, but it was done here first. And there's this one model in the top left, which we thought was really cool. It was popular in the origami circles, and then we learned about this history. We call it a hyperbolic paraboloid, and we studied it mathematically, and it turns out it doesn't actually exist, which is a fun surprise. I encourage you to make one. It's just, you take a square piece of paper, fold concentric squares, alternating mountain and valley, you fold a diagonal, and it pops into this cool saddle surface, except material's cheating, and this is impossible to do mathematically. And sadly, you know, the real world is merely an approximation of mathematical reality, so it goes. So then you see another example, also in this kind of pleat folding. Instead of folding concentric squares, you fold concentric circles. You get this cool model on the left. This is also by an anonymous student in Albers' course in 1927 and 28. I hear that the best designers are anonymous designers. I'd really like to know who this is. Maybe, yeah, anyway. And then on the right, we see a related sculpture by Irene Sherwinski, who is Santi's wife at the Bauhaus at MoMA, and maybe the same person, I don't know. Similar, but I'm sure there was inspiration, but whether how many people were involved, it's a mystery. I'm gonna, yeah. I don't know, so I'm gonna abstract this into, we'll just say Josef somehow was involved in this pieces. So here's an example that we folded, just to give you a bigger picture, better photograph. And then our sculpture explores what happens if you take many of these pieces and weave them together into cool pieces. We got to be at moment 2, like 100 years later or whatever. Not quite, but here's a little example of what it looks like to put one of these together. So fold a bunch of these circular pieces, you can squeeze them and flex them, but they kind of want to relax into their natural form, and you can get them to interlock in interesting ways and make cool 3D sculpture. In reality, this takes hours or days, but in movie time, it's about 30 seconds. And we can make pretty large sculptures in this style. Here's a large one with my dad. This is our offices. And then I wanted to show this piece because this was, you heard that Josef and Anni didn't work together much, but we don't like that. We like collaborating a lot. So we tried to imagine a fictional collaboration between the two of them. So Josef here is represented by the curved crease origami. Maybe he didn't invent it, but he was involved somehow. And then we've got some hand-dyed yarn, not made by Anni, but something she might work with. And also, this is not just paper, this is linen backed with paper. So the paper is what's doing the folding in some sense, but if you touch it, it's linen material. This is in the permanent collection at the Black Mountain College, which is cool. I think we were the first non-Bauhaus or Black Mountain College people to have a piece there. And let's see, we also are glass blowers. My dad is the father of Canadian glass in the 60s. And there's a glass lab here at MIT. We get to make glass things. This was not made there, but made by 2 master glass blowers out at Pilchuck. So this is trying to reinterpret the same folding idea, but folding glass with Kevlar gloves. It's very exciting, very hot, a couple thousand degrees. And we also play with a kind of ship in a bottle effect where we put the folded paper inside glass after it's cooled down. And in recent work, we've been making sort of more what look like functional forms, like this teapot, also with a ship in a bottle kind of thing. This would not actually hold real tea because it would fall at the bottom, but paper tea, it works fine. Or these frogs, these we call ghost frogs. They're representing the disappearing, the disappearing species of frogs, very sad. This is a little happier, a magical glass brush. It's filled with this paper ink, and also the brush bristles are made of paper. This is a giant 5-foot long brush. It's the length of our glory hole. It's the largest piece you can make in the glass lab, at least here, 35 feet. It's made with Mariel Bass, who teaches glass blowing here. And the brush magically writes words as you, whatever the user's intent, it will start folding into the letters that you want to write. That's a brush with words. We also like burning things, so this is burning paper with hot glass to make a pyro print, something like this. And then we fold that print into a 3D sculpture, and then to close the loop, we put it inside glass. And so this gets us into the printed. Lately, most of our work, we print something onto the paper to make it interesting before folding. Gives us a second layer of stuff. This is the complete works of Shakespeare, restricted to just the words that have red in them. So feathered and dishonored and redemption, and that's all of the words that Shakespeare used with red. And they're colored red, of course. These were, there's a recent documentary episode of Craft in America that shows a little bit of us making one of these pieces. If you want to check it out, it's free online. And this brings us to another piece that we imagined collaborating with Josef Albers on. So he made the mural you see in the top left. It's called Manhattan. It's 54 feet long, huge thing. It was originally in the Pan Am building in New York City, which is now renamed. And also they didn't like it at some point, so they threw it out. So this piece is lying in a landfill somewhere in New York. But we thought it was really cool. It looks like the Manhattan skyline. And so we reinterpreted it, we measured all the lengths and put it on a circle so that you could fold it with this concentric circle idea, and you get another 3D sculpture. We've made a few in this series. Our recent work has gotten a little bigger. This is 14 feet tall. It's called Hanging Out, and it's meant to represent the population of Fitchburg, 41,000 people, using a fun algorithm to randomly lay out people with hand-drawn drawings. And so this was in Fitchburg. This is another complementary piece called Hanging In that we just exhibited in LA. This is representing various endangered species in the world. And the last thing I wanted to show is some work we've been doing with fabric and making fashion dresses. So this is a synthetic, I think, polyester. We're collaborating with New York fashion designer Win-Win, and using heat annealing to make creases in the fabric and then draping it on the dress form. This is partly with Alfonso, and this is what it looks like on a person. And this is another fun fabric that actually holds a crease. You can just fold it like origami in some directions and it works. It's, I think, polyester fibers in one direction and metal fibers in the other direction. So it's pretty fun. And that's our little tour. Thanks.
All right, great. So my name is Marcelo Coelho. I'm a faculty in the Department of Architecture where I teach design, so I teach product design, interaction design, and AI. And sorry, before I talk for too long, I have 10 minutes, right? Can you just do this when it's this might just rifle. I actually did my PhD here, so it's always really nice to be back at the lab. It's fun to see the spaces here, everybody. So yeah, let me just get into it. So a lot of the work that I do is focus on how we embody and physically interact with computers. As you can probably see by the colored square, Albers is sort of throughout all of it, but I think in many ways, I think my particular connection is in always trying to rethink about how we see things and give viewers an opportunity to rethink how they see the world. And the work that I do, spans scale. So on the left, you have a drawing that was done with a grain of sand, all the way to very, very large scales. On the right, you have something that's the size of a stadium, and all this kind of different material representations. So let me dig in. So Sandcastles is a collaboration. I think now it is. All right, cool. So Sandcastles is a collaboration with this artist called Vic Winnies. Vic does a lot of photographic work, and he had done this trip through Europe where he drew all these castles using a camera, which is a pre-photography instrument. And then we collaborated on trying to get those drawings into grains of sand, the fundamental material the castles are made out of. And we used a FIB, which is a focus ion beam. This is machine learning here at MIT. That lets you draw or etch or ablate a surface with ions, and then scan, as you can see, with electrons. So it's a kind of photography without photons, sort of a good way to think about it. And there are a lot of this very interesting place with scale, right? So we're working with grains that are smaller than a millimeter in size, that are difficult to see and kind of arrange in place. And the final image they create are very, very large, somewhat the size of the screen about. So let me give you a few examples. So this is one of them. This is a castle in Germany. And I really love the sort of kind of artifacts that you see. A big part of this work that I think is really interesting to me, sort of this ergonomic relationship that we have with the image. You see it up close, you see a castle, you see it from far away, you see a grain. And somewhere in the middle, your mind balances between these two worlds. This also took a very long time. It took maybe 4 years to figure out how to do all of this, which is a little crazy. And while doing it, like late at night at the lab, I kept thinking, maybe we can just fake this in Photoshop. But you can't. And I think there's this beautiful surprises that happen when you work with materials. So you can see this image on that side. It's perhaps a little hard to see on the screen, but there's a piece of the grain that cracked.
because when you're throwing ions at it, there's a lot of energy going in, and sometimes it breaks. So these qualities of this sort of broken grain, I think, make the image really, really interesting. And I bet if I was faking, I wouldn't have done that. This to me is another one that was really precious, because this is a castle that's sitting on a mountain, and you can see my cursor now. So right underneath the castle, you can see this little mountain on the right side. So this is a mountain, right? It's a very big mountain, but that outline of the mountain looks very similar to the outline of the grain. And these sort of very, very different scales overlaid into the same image. Like when I saw that, I was like, all right, this is worth it. This is cool. Totally changing directions a little bit. So 640 by 480 is a project that I did. I was still a student here. This is a commission for Design Miami to create something that I thought would help us kind of rethink the role of design in the world and what the future of computation is in that world. And for me, it's very much the idea of let's get computers out on the screen, put them out and make them physical, be able to sort of think of computers as a kind of new material. So what we did is we built all this little sort of mini computer, mini pixels. Every one is a full computer with battery and electronics. When you touch them, they change color. And if you touch and hold one of them, when you touch another one, you can clone colors from each other. And your body becomes a literal wire, actually sending data through your body from the skin tubes and that. So it's a way to bring things and copy and paste away from the real world. And you can get lots and lots of them together. And start to put patterns. There's a lot of work that goes into the stuff. It's very much kind of an industrial effort. And everything in this project is actually custom all the way to the battery. So like custom injection molding enclosures, custom glass. It's quite a bit of stuff happening here to make all these interactions work. But I was very lucky to show this all over the place and see how people use it. And it's really interesting because a good way to describe it for me is like, you know how people write stuff in the bathroom wall? It's always like crappy scribbles, and they get complex and rich, super fascinating. It's the exact same thing. People walk up to this, they'll write their names, and then they'll like draw a flower, and then they like expand much more complex things. And I've seen people do wonderful things with this piece. It's been super fascinating. Kids absolutely love it too. This is actually a really awesome exhibit. This is at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, which is a place that has traditional paintings that are incredible, but things that you're not allowed to touch. And so people would come to this, and they'll kind of stand in front of it, and then the security guard would go be like, hey, you can touch it. And then people would start moving it around. And then they would discover there was like no label whatsoever, so people would discover they can clone colors by touching more than one of them. And there was one day that I came there, and there was a group of about 10 teachers that discovered that they could clone colors across each other. So they're like all holding hands, this huge group of people, and they're passing colors around this wall, which is very much a very different experience to the experience you typically have in a place like this, where you can't touch anything, you can't touch people, you can't sort of physically collaborate and work together. This is at a collector in Troy, Michigan, so it's very, very large. And you can really paint with light too, which is really fun. It's like it really feels like it's a kind of light as a paint. And also discover the sort of more, sort of like larger scale behaviors. If you cover the light from remote control, you can create this digital silhouettes. Cool. How much time am I with time? 3? Okay. Okay. So this is not a ball, it's a project that I did in anticipation for the World Cup that happened in Brazil some years ago. And we wanted to do something that would celebrate the ball. We so like, let's make an image of the ball. And we started by just doing this kind of visualizations, like how many balls you need to create an image, where do we put them, what kind of images can we make. Realized very quickly that I wanted to make a custom ball to make this work. And I like to think of it as almost like e-ink. It's like it's kind of tuned, by state pixel that you can control by just rotating the ball. It turns out that it's a very horrible soccer ball to play soccer with, because when somebody kicks it towards you, you don't know how fast it's spinning. So it's horrible for playing, great for art. And we're inspired by this image from Leonardo da Vinci from his Luca Pacioli's book, where it was sort of the kind of first moment where kind of mathematical description of forms and the visual representation came together. And it was an image of a soccer ball, or something kind of like a soccer ball. So then wrote some software, we projected this into the stadium, into the field. Did two images, one in Mexico at the Estadio Azteca. I'm not that into soccer, but if you're Brazilian, this is like a very important place. Or we did another one at Pictorial Weavings in Rio as well. Keep going. To be able to make this work, we gave instructions to people that there's a group of volunteers that helped us build the image. They like to think of kind of a human code that was sort of translated from the software we wrote so that people could kind of visually and sort of distributively put the balls on the field. And here, I'll show you what that looked like. It was actually really awesome to have people build this and people being able to improvise. This is the kind of stuff that's like, you could say, you could just have a robot, but people can do things like they can look at it and be like, actually, no, we don't have enough space here. Let's move this one a little more that way. Also, because of the fluctuation in temperature, the size of the balls changed quite a bit, and you had to adjust them to make it really work. You had to improvise. The other thing that was really fascinating with this project is that when we were making the image, we were at the ground, so you're seeing from this very sort of shallow perspective, and it's really hard to see if it's going to work, if it's going to look right. But as soon as you could fly over it, and it had the same perspective that Vinci had, and he drew it, you could really see this pop up in 3D and see the image. So it's sort of a magical moment to finally see it this way. And this is the one in Vidigal. It's funny because from my perspective, the grass looks blue from here. And we made two images in the end. So these are the two images. We looked at taking a nod to sort of Renaissance composition and sort of very far away backgrounds. Can I get one more minute? Okay. I'll do this quick. After doing that project, I got a chance to work on the Paralympic ceremonies in Brazil, which was incredible. Paralympians are amazing. A big part of this project is that I wanted to make sure the technology is a big part of it. And technology is a big part of the Paralympians' lives. So making sure that it was a big part of the ceremony is really important. So the technology is throughout all the segments in the ceremony. So this is Anni Albers, the Paralympian, has no border. And in this segment, she's dancing samba with a kuka robot, and she's wearing the blades, and she has a 3D printed dress as well. Robots don't dance that well, by the way. The segment that I was really, it was kind of like my favorite, the one that I spent a lot of my time on, is this one. It's called Beyond Vision, and it was focused on the sense of sight. And I spent a lot of time working with visually impaired athletes, some of their life was like, and to design the segment. And we also invented kind of a hybrid technology for making all of this work, where we have a radio communication system that uses DTMF, which is this old tones that you hear from your phone, or you dial your phone, you hear this like doo, 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 doo. And it's cool because a person can hear those and identify them, but electronics can also do that. So I had a system that controlled the sort of light sticks that the dancers had, and then told the dancers where to go. And this is what it looked like.
Hi everyone, my name is Lasa Kubusheva and I'm a material designer and researcher, co-founder of Crafting Plastic Studio and also a former MISTI fellow here at MIT, and now currently I'm a visiting researcher at the CBA, Center on Bits and Atoms. And I would like to show you a little bit of my practice, which is very much grounded in biomaterials and especially bioplastics, but also in the broader questions of how we nowadays in this critical phase of transition, when human-made materials now outweigh the natural biomass, how do we actually want new materials to define the future we hope to live in? And also, what is our role as designers in this accelerating shift towards a more regenerative future? So I would like to show you how we explore the material research through design and how this work also resonates with values that Anni and Josef Albers stood for, which for me is a lot about how craft meets the technology, material perception meets education, and also ecological environments. So at Crafting Plastics, we operate between the lab research, design implementation, and also scalable production. And in our almost 10 years of work, we developed projects that turn lab experiments into real-world products across the scale. So from self-initiative projects to industrial collaborations, and it's all within the realm of circular economy and circular design. We work with accessible abundance of renewable feedstock from with biopolymers from plants, with the other ones that are micro produced, with polymers from agriculture, marine waste, and we create different composites, mostly as an alternative to traditional fossil fuel-based plastics. But the real challenge are actually not the ingredients, but actually how we are able to define the scaling performance, how we are able to build the trust of the consumer, and how we are able to shift the perception in these materials. So how can we design materials that are actually durable enough for daily use, that could last 20 plus years, but yet they could be compostable at the end of their life, and they can break down into nutrients, CO2 and water? Can we develop materials with programmable aging and that can be tailored to the product's intended lifespan? Instead of starting with the packaging, we chose something more intimate at the beginning, which was eyewear, that's worn directly on the face. And actually it wasn't an easy task, but eventually we mastered the material blends that overcame many constraints of biomaterials and biopolymers. And the most common reaction was, will this melt on my face? And when it started to melt on my face. So this revealed kind of the trust in sustainable and biodegradable materials is not really there. And if there is any, it's rational, but also it's very emotional. And the fear that these materials that won't outlast us, unlike petroleum-based materials, often determines whether people are willing to adopt them or not. And so changing the perception became core part of our design challenge, especially with the question, how are we able to create biomaterials and products that are perishable, but they still could be precious enough that we want to use them. So we demonstrate this strength and resilience within our collections, showcasing that the performance of our newly developed biomaterials are strong enough to overcome all our prejudices against them, including, for instance, these 3D printed stools collections that were tested up to 200 kilos loading, or these furniture products that are designed to carry really significant loads of materials or books and so on. Another example is our circular cap system. It's called Northern Gastro Circular System, which is made of our material blend that withstand the temperature, temperatures up to 100 degrees Celsius. making it really suitable to hot beverages and also for mass use in closed-loop systems such as festival or city markets. And this project we deploy in a partnership with the municipality of Bratislava, which is actually and this city is using tens of thousands cups throughout the years, and these cups are designed here to be used for more than hundreds of times, and at the end of their life they can compose them together with the food scraps in industrial or electrical compost. However, the most important part of the process continually brings us back to proving that we are not leaving a negative footprint behind. And this image shows that in a controlled environment, the material begins to break down into CO2, water, and nutrients, but only if it actually meets the controlled environment. And that's something that we also need to communicate to the public. So meanwhile, we developed the Nuatan material platform, which is a range of bioplastic solutions for value-added products, and this is compatible with various plastic processing technologies. This is, for instance, our sample box, which is featuring material and technology samples ready to scale across different industries. Yeah, it's here. But to prove the performance alone, it's not enough, and there is much more in it to help people trust in new material realm and get them engaged. And the sensory perceptions like a touch, color change, and smell plays really a key role in how people see, feel, accept, and also allow to integrate these new materials into our systems. So we asked, what if we actually design future materials with completely novel capabilities, materials that could potentially smell, sense, and even communicate? What if they become dynamic rather than static, and they could act as partners rather than a resource that we simply exploit? So in our breathe in, breathe out project, we, for instance, use gas chromatography, mass spectrometry to identify the volatile compound and aroma-active ingredients within our bioplastic blends. And this actually allowed the users to smell the difference between fossil fuel-based plastics and bio-based materials. Later, during my Fulbright research at Jumlab at Penn and also as a Misty Fellow here at MIT, we began exploring programmable biological materials using synthetic biology methods. So we work with various biologically controlled hydrogels and 2D printing techniques, augmented with biological active compounds. By embedding transcription and translation self-resistance into the 3D printed hydrogels, we explored materials that could potentially sense the pH, temperature, or possibly also toxins in the air, and this all without living cells. Our research on this topic was published in Frontiers under the title Multi-Scale Design of Cell-Free Biologically Active Structures. And it showcases how the interdisciplinary collaboration between bioengineers, architects, designers, and chemists would lead to inventions of materials at augmented biomaterials and architectural scale in the future. We call also this group of materials SenseBiome, which is in short means the living light biomaterial systems for healthier homes. Another ongoing research project in the realm of interactive biomaterials is the BioLink project, together with Lucy Lee, that presented before, and Vivian JB from Tangible Media Group. We've been working on the BioLink fabrication workflow for functionalizing novel biocomposites with laser-induced graphene, which actually essentially means making biomaterials conductive. And this is an example of material approach where we are trying to provide a tool for communities to prototype accessible and compostable electronics. Yet, it's not enough to invent things in the lab, and solutions alone are not sufficient if society isn't part of the process. So we must weave the new materials into public imaginations and industrial collaborations. And design is definitely the key to communicate the material. So that's why a big part of our practice involves translating materials into presentable forms that move beyond the lab. So for Science Beyond 2, we actually shifted from synthetic biology to chemically augmented algae-cellulose lattices modules that change the color with UV exposure, making invisible environmental dangers visible through the material response and material color change. So in this project, color essentially becomes data and material is medium and environmental tool. This was a presentation at Milan Design Week where we created a large-scale installation as an environmental responsible sensor for urban diagnostics. And people were really able to perceive the real-time change in the UV and solar radiations. So these kind of radiations that penetrates our skin but remains completely invisible to the eye. And thanks to the dynamic biomaterials, the unseen become visible, and transforming an invisible problem into a learning tool is also a very good way how to start to lead an important dialogues, maybe also between the people who are not necessarily that concerned about the changing environment. We adapted these dynamic materials further into interior applications like room dividers or seatings for homes, but also as an interface, a biomaterial skin that can be applied on various structures and biomaterial surfaces. So this is these are the materials that we developed for our latest collaborations with the partner from the industry, Lexus. And we've developed a project called Liminal Cycles, which is a large-scale biomaterial installation presented last December at IC in Miami. And it was one-to-one scale representations of their newest concept car, where we tried to reimagine the future vehicle called in living-like biomaterials that could breathe, sense, inform us, and eventually also ambient decay. So the biomaterial transformations here embodies the powers of the sun, so people were really able to see throughout the day how it's changed. But also the presence of people continuously interacted with the objects and the material responses to both to ever-changing environments and the user. But to create even more diverse biomaterial solutions, we definitely need the interdisciplinary teams, and to design better matter, we must learn to collaborate across this discipline, and that's why we launched the studio actually today at Design Academy 91. So if someone is in Europe and would be interested in knowing more, please let me know. But this will be a studio where the students explore the intersections between the biology system, thinking, design, and sustainable materials by working in the interdisciplinary team really from the very beginning. And we aim to teach them to see the material through the lens of active matter. So in the end, they dare to imagine and craft not only healthier materials, but also the solution systems and societies that surround them. Thank you.
Thank you for staying. It's a lot of people talking. Well, first of all, I want to thank Chloe for having me here talking. I want to thank Zach and Future Sketches for bringing this kind of events to the lab to enhance the vision and for teaching recreating the past, which definitely changed my research more than I thought. Coming that my research is much more technical. So. And thanks to the Albers Foundation for preserving not only the artistic legacy, but their vision, and coming here and sharing that vision with us. My name is Alfonso Parra Rubio. I am a PhD at the Center for Bits and Atoms, studying architected materials in the form of plate lattices. And in my PhD path, the writing legacy and vision of Anni Albers has been a huge inspiration to follow. I mean, of course, her artwork is outstanding quality, but mostly her writing. And the two main ideas that I have interpreted and I've been emphasizing in my work is like how she pushed still the extreme techniques intended for practical applications into an art form through free experimentation, and also how she neglected like the dichotomy of like pieces needs to be functional or maybe observational and was making something very much in the middle. So today in these 10 minutes I want to show you my PhD path, where I try to keep these premises alive, using the craft of folding to reach technical results at the same time that allow me to do a little bit of artistic experimentation. So in this talk I will explain how folding became from a tool to a craft to an art to research, my tiny contribution in the technical side and the artistic side. So here we go. Folding as a tool. We didn't invent folding by any means, we just observe it, and nature does it all the time to transform matter between stable states, to change properties or to unveil new futures. What we did was to provide it with symbolism and folklore. So as soon as we have materials we could fold, we introduced this to our culture and provide a specific type of meaning to add. That sink, that legacy, like that sunk into society and that form, that generated art form, that the start of modern origami could be maybe Akira Yoshizawa, which is the key point movement to start making fold that has symbolism to representation of folds. There's a beautiful analogy in classical music that I learned from Jason Kuhn in our main class. With classical music and origami. Classical music you have composers and performers, and in origami you have the same roles. And Akira is named to be a prolific composer, and people said that he made 50,000 new designs, but I don't know about that, because if you divide 50,000 by 365, it's 135 years, maybe one per day, and I don't know. Maybe yes. He definitely did a lot of books, and also he came with the diagrams that even nowadays we use to share information folding. Then computers came and things got crazy. Computers very much democratized complexity. Computers changed the way we think, and it's the way the computer changed the way we think about folding in general. We start putting the math behind of those creases and folds, and that is exactly the enabler that allow us to put the origamis inside of research. A key component of folding is that folding is a universal transformational tool that operates on any scale. That is great for research because people can focus on the tiny things and on the big things. Folding provides a beautiful thematic aspect to study, material science aspect, architectural aspect, and all that is whole into research. So my tiny contribution this field is that I'm educated as an engineer, and for my PhD I'm trying to seek for new materials. I love geometry and folding, and I'm very lucky to mix those passions in my PhD work. And in order to talk about my research, I will introduce very fast two concepts: what is a cellular material and what is an architected material, and how using folding you can achieve things. I don't know if they're good or bad, but thanks. Geometry and materials has been tied together since forever. Since we were able to look close to things, which it was 1655 with the invention of the microscope. Robert Hooke saw that material has structure, very defined structure, and that structure provides behavior. And nature used that all the time. We discovered that nature used geometry as a tool to generate custom mechanical properties. And also nature doesn't just make a material. We humans design in a very departmental way. Nature makes systems, an embedded system. Everything is everything. Lorna Gibson was the first that put name to this field, cellular solids, and name to cellular solids to those materials which are created by the repetition of a unit cell that provides global properties in which those properties are equally defined by the geometry of that unit cell and the constituent material. And we humans, when we engineer those type of materials, is when we call them architected materials. So at the end of the day, architected materials is like man-made, human-made cellular materials. And the bigger, and this put us into something more interesting that is what materials do, which is like, this type of materials is a mixture between what is a material and what is a structure. And as soon as we learned that lesson, we were able to, when humans tried to make the tallest thing ever, they did something that was 150 meters, just brute forcing material, and just thousands of years later, try again with this lesson learned about material and structure, was able to do something more than almost 3 times bigger, 600 times larger. So for my research, I'm trying to fold materials into the form of plate lattices to expand this concept of what's material and structure, but as you can see above, I want to explore what is material, structure, and mechanism, the same way that our bones is all that. This first example of work, it's called Kirigami Corrugation, Strong Modular and Programmable Plate Lattices, where work with Eric Demain, among others, where given we want to satisfy a volume that has an arbitrary external shape, we take a very common fold immutability, we expand it, we bad treat it, and we show that we can satisfy volumes. So now we have the cellular material component, but if you make like another geometrical trick and you play with what's called the Maxwell criteria of stability, you can weaken them out in their bending. So that's giving you for free what we were looking for, which is this blend between a material that is incredibly strong on compression, up to 60 kilonewtons, but can just like be easily deflected, to making more tangible this mixture between material, structure, and mechanism. This second work that I want to show is way more conservative, not exciting, but interesting, because it's much more about just material and structure. But the interesting part here was like, these metallic plates are very interesting for their strength performance, but we only can 3D print them, and 3D printing, only solves complexity on the 3D print plate, but real life problems have real life sizes. So using off-the-shelf materials as cheap as you can get, and you can get flat steel anywhere in the world, we showed that you can get some semi-periodic lattices and fold them to satisfy those lattices through progressive folding with 3D print. Everything here, you can replicate it almost in your house, assemble them together, and show that geometry really have projections. And they happen to be great candidates for energy absorption. In this case, this lattice is absorbing a big impact on a seismometer, which is a very delicate component. But the lattice is just like, I got you in the fall, so you can be happy in your measurements. The third work I want to show, technical work I want to show, is a little bit more related here because it's woven beams, but basically we've been trying, the whole previous work is trying to fill volumes, but if you want to increase the scale, sometimes you don't need to fill volumes, you need to satisfy a surface. So if you want to get your work into the architectural size, I started looking about what happened if we build from the surface to the volume. I was very lucky to have a summer where I could do free research, so I spent almost all the time with Rembrandt, and specifically this triangular pattern. And I discovered that if you make an expansion and you assemble one element straight and one element, and in the lower one you mirror it to the 60 degrees, you make this very interesting concept that is a virtual net of woven beams in a hexagonal grid. So you can see the pink channel weaving with the green channel and with the white channel. This is great for an engineer because you preserve thickness. Indeed, this is called second moment of inertia. And I haven't seen many origami folds that when mirrored then you preserve thickness. That's structurally great. Because of now you have a set of a cellular construction that can satisfy shapes and mechanical properties where all of that is encoded in your local foldability unit cell, and you can bring it to metals, and I want to bring it into larger sizes. So the part of this talk that I've never done before is showing my expressive exploration using exactly the same tools we do for research. I was lucky to have friends that are down to do things, and I was lucky to get a grant from MIT that allows us to buy aluminum. And I'm lucky to also have a shop that can mill aluminum, so we this experiment we call metallic kusudama, composing it. You have one piece here, composed of 3 pieces. And the intention of this exhibit, how we phrase it, was about the way you read papers today is like you get the paper, you check the images. If you like the images, read the text. So we were like, what if you have sculptures, and if you like the sculpture, you read the paper, like just like 3D those 2D images, and that's what we did. We had 3 pieces, work with Clara Mondilova. Then we got invited, that's Eric with the hat, to Haystack, and we decided to, let's fold wood. So let's change radical the material, that radically change the process, that radically change the experience and the pieces as well. Like force you to work in other scale, forces you to make different processes. And the last pieces of work I want to share is that I'm also involved here in the MIT Glass Lab, and there couldn't be more difficult materials than metals and glass. But they talk together pretty nicely. So I've been folding some closed volumes in the form of metallic kusudamas and just popping bubbles of molten glass in the center. And their conversations they have are pretty interesting. I have to say, I'm having a good time. And this is just this example about, I don't know what's technical, I don't know what is artistic, I'm just curious about the exploration in general. And that's all I have for you today.
We're going to talk really briefly, and like in a summarizing thoughts of lots of the things you heard today. We heard a lot about materials today, and a lot about a love for materials and letting the materials speak and crafting with materials. And I'm kind of going to do like a little bit of a closing loop of, we know what materials are. What if your materials are alive? Does all of that still apply? Like, we still, can we be okay with manipulating them if they're alive? Is it better? And I want to think about some thoughts that Annie brought up in some of her writing, and I think we've heard again and again today. Alfonso just said that he really likes the dialogue that metal and glass have together. So we're going to talk really briefly about new materialism and how that feels for artists and how it feels for engineers, and how maybe some history of bioart might help us think through that. Really briefly about myself. I come from film. All of my materials used to be digital, then they weren't. And mostly I used to put this quote at the beginning of all my talks for myself, because I'm obsessed, is that I can't remove myself from my research. I cannot be an anonymous artist. It's in everything I do. And as much as I try to create fictions in my work, I'm in there everywhere else. And I kind of want to take that thought and loop back around to it at the end of it, when we think about everything else we heard today. But just as a brief intro to new materialism, it's, have you ever held an object, crafted with it, and kind of felt, oh, this thing has a mood, a force of its own? It was a philosophical movement that came from physics, actually, but really took off in the arts and kind of struggles in engineering. But it kind of rethinks the role of matter not as something passive, but as something dynamic, self-organized, and capable of agency, which is a weird thought to put in a science context, but materials that can do things, not just be things that we force them to be. And we're going to just really briefly kind of speed through 50 years of theory with Karen Barrett and Jane Bennett and Manuel de Landa and Vicky Kirby. And it's really all these things I just said where, matter, the agency of matters between all of these thinkers seems to boil down to this thing that it is the relationship between materials, not what we inherently want to do with those materials. So as the materials act upon one another in their relational relativity to each other, that is where their use comes from and where their real beauty emerges, and where they act upon one another. And that maybe us as well, in relation to these materials, our artistic practice does not exist with us on our own and only in relation to the crafts that we create. As I said, I was going to use bioart as a case study to kind of mill around this thought, because maybe it's slightly easier to understand when we think of living materials rather than just non-living materials. So a brief history of 100 years of bioart. Edsteichen and Stilferium are a great example of early bioart where it is not what we consider bioart nowadays, where it is synthetic engineering, but it is manually engineering and growing plants in the ways that we want them to be by still interfering with nature and self-pollinizing them until he had the very specific bright colors that he wanted. A type of early bioart. He interfered with nature, he made new colors, he was a photographer, and he needed the bright blue hues in order to create high contrast photography so that flowers would appear nicer in photographs. Joe Davis, kind of hard not to mention, the grandfather of bioart and a Cambridge local, genetically encoded DNA into artwork, a symbolic image for a German rune, a stylized vulva, and a fertility symbol that he embedded into DNA. Marta de Menez, who interfered with nature in a rather violent way, but once again, bioart nonetheless. She took live butterflies when they were still in a butterfly pupae and pierced the cocoon with needles. The butterfly would not die, the caterpillar would still turn into a butterfly, but every place in which she had pierced it, patterns would emerge. So she changed forever the pattern of this butterfly, but the butterfly itself remained unharmed. Oren Katz and Einat Zur are somewhat like the parents of all bioarts. Semi-worrying dolls was a relatively disturbing artwork of grown cells that are like, living tissue dolls for you to do as you please. But it, again, brings this relationship of what is your relationship with your material when you don't only craft it, but you grow it. Eduardo Katz, GFP Bunny, the most controversial piece of the early 2000s. Alba the bunny was meant to be a pet, but was taken into a biolab and allegedly CRISPRed with a GFP protein found in jellyfish to become a glowing rabbit. To this day, it is not actually known if he succeeded, because that's quite a highlighty photo he put out, and it's the only picture that exists of Alba. So, ethical debate ongoing. Is it art? Is it exploration? We'll never know. Eternally unclear if he actually succeeded. What he did succeed at is that once Alba was allegedly genetically modified, she was never allowed to leave the lab again. So the pet remained in the lab for the rest of her life. The artist collective BCL, which was Georg Tremmel and Toko Neo in 2015, created a biological art piece called Ghost in the Cell, which was a artificially constructed heart muscle with the DNA of fans of Hatsune Miku that grew in a gallery and beat on its own for fans to come and watch their own DNA beat in petri dishes, hearts outside of their bodies. And a very contemporary work, Sentient Clit by Jiabao Li, who's a dear colleague of mine, which used her own period blood to grow a secondary clitoris outside of her body in a petri dish. Again, the relationship question still stands. What is your relationship with the craft that you decide to, with the materials in the craft that you decide to grow? And is it different if you're growing it from scratch? Hideo Iwasaki's work asks the end of this. You have grown your craft, you have grown your material, and it has come to die. What do you do? Do we hold a funeral for it? He created a prayer, which was a memorial service for all artificial cells in biological universities in all of Japan. The memorial is held once a year, every year, for everybody to gather and honor all the cells that we artificially create in our biolabs and then flush down the sink. So I'm asking the question here around engineered systems and cares. I'm asking a question around, when I say that I haunt my own research like a ghost, is that true for my materials as well? Do they haunt the work I do right with me? My own personal work sort of focuses around care and community. It focuses around how do we create a relationship between one another by figuring out what our relationship is with the things that we work with. With film, it was about how do we communicate words and images and theaters, and how do we create spaces where people can learn to care for things that aren't human, and does it maybe make them care for humans differently? So my currently preferred companion and player organism is the dinoflagellite. It has a 12-hour cycle. It glows when agitated, so its reactions are easily observed. And it has become a relatively fun companion of mine. It likes to die, so I very frequently have to hold a funeral for it and replace it. And my life has started to revolve around its 12-hour resting active cycle. What I found most interesting about working with dinoflagellites is that the resting cycle introduces a similar dynamic that I used to have with humans when I still directed theater and film, which was that it felt contractual. It needed resting time, which is just a fun thought that I like to explore whenever I think about bioart. And it kind of brings in this sentimental relationship to your work. And I kind of want to reference another mentor and inspiration who I kind of borrow the term sentimentality from, who's Hannah McGregor, and she talks about sentimentality as a key form of meaning making. It's banal and personal, and above all, it's a mediation of what it means to care deeply and know that caring is both necessary and utterly insufficient in the world that we live in. It kind of allows for this world of wish fulfillment, which I think a lot of craftsmen relate to, because it's this desire to keep making something. And she has a wonderful quote that I quite enjoy, where my concern with sentimentality in general and sentimental culture in particular is that it has much less to do with aesthetic questions about whether or not this is good art, which is a very hierarchical cultural thing that seems useless, than it does with how the culture we love teaches us how to be in and think about the world. So when we do bioart, how do we think about the world? I'm trying to create systems and biohybrid systems in which we're trying to incentivize a co-created living material to play by the same rules that I want to play with. What inspiration can I give it to move in the same ways that I might want to move inside of a game? In these particular cases, I'm using electrowetting to incentivize algae that lives in water to move from one dot to another, and how does that change the types of games that I can design? How does that change how humans might play this game in a gallery, and then also relate to one another? And how does it change when the material is no longer algae, but for example, blood? It kind of introduces like a set of constraints and a set of rules and a different way where the material leads the research, which is, I think, a very common thought with everybody here, but it's fun to put it in the perspective of, no, the material does actually lead the research. It's not me. And when it dies, I hold a funeral. And when it comes to teaching, I have to think about how to teach with it, and how to teach empathy with it, and how to teach children and other participants about living materials that we use and usurp and use in infrastructures, and the empathy that we build with this material, and then learn to move on from it. And this is true for big organisms like octopi and squid, or small organisms like bacteria and calobacteria. And this time? Okay, I will skip the rest, which is about equipment. Yeah, kind of it.
Okay, thank you so much to all the speakers. We're gonna release you for some restful evening plans. And yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you for, the Albers Foundation for coming down with us. We're like so grateful. And thank you, Zach, also for allowing me to organize this funky event. Yeah, have a good evening.